Scientists extracted DNA from 3,200-year-old infant bones buried under a house in Israel. What they found in a German laboratory confirmed something the Bible had been saying for 2,700 years. Goliath's people, the Philistines, were not from the land they dominated, and the question of where they truly came from has haunted scholars for over a century. Along the southern coast of the ancient Levant, 5 fortified cities rose to prominence: Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath, and Gaza. These cities formed a confederation known as the Philistine Pentapolis, a political and military alliance that dominated the region for centuries. Their names echo through the Hebrew Bible, not only as powerful adversaries, but as the backdrop for some of its most dramatic stories. The Philistines are cast as the arch-enemies of Israel, facing off against figures like Samson, Delilah, and Goliath, the giant warrior from Gath whose defeat by David became legend. Archaeological excavations at these sites have uncovered a material world that stands apart from their neighbors. Philistine pottery, with its bold red and black designs, fills the ruins. Imported luxury goods, elaborate weapons, and unique architectural features signal a culture both wealthy and distinct. In Gath, a cache of Aegean-style swords and a massive citadel point to a society with deep martial traditions. At Ashkelon, the sudden appearance of Mycenaean-type ceramics and new urban layouts mark a break from the Canaanite past. Each city, while self-governing, shared customs and artifacts that set them apart from the peoples around them. Despite their prominence in both history and scripture, the Philistines remain an enigma. For more than a century, scholars have debated their true origins. Were they local Canaanites who adopted foreign customs, or outsiders who seized the coast in the chaos that followed the Bronze Age collapse? The evidence in pottery, architecture, and burial patterns suggests a story far more complex than simple invasion or imitation. Yet the question of where the Philistines came from, and how they became such a formidable force, has lingered without a definitive answer. The mystery of their beginnings would persist, fueling both fascination and controversy, until the arrival of a new kind of evidence. Across the eastern Mediterranean, the late 13th and early 12th centuries BCE brought a wave of destruction that toppled some of the ancient world's most powerful kingdoms. The Mycenaean palaces of Greece fell to fire and chaos. Hattusa, capital of the Hittite Empire, was sacked and abandoned. Ugarit, once a thriving port on the Syrian coast, vanished from the map. Clay tablets in the ruins of these cities break off mid-sentence, leaving only hints of the violence that ended them. Amid this collapse, Egyptian records at Medinet Habu, the mortuary temple of Ramesses III, describe a series of invasions by a coalition known as the Sea Peoples. The reliefs carved into the temple's walls show ships packed with warriors, families, and ox-drawn carts. Among the invaders, the Pelisets stand out, depicted with distinctive feathered headdresses and round shields. The hieroglyphic captions identify them by name. Modern scholars widely agree that the Peliset are the people later known as the Philistines. The Sea Peoples struck at Egypt around 1180 BCE, but after their defeat, the inscriptions of Ramesses III report that the Peliset were settled in the land of the Philistines. With the collapse of old powers and the creation of a power vacuum along the Levantine coast, new groups found space to take root. The destruction cleared the way for the Philistines to establish their 5-city confederation, reshaping the political and cultural map of the region. The world that emerged was unstable, but it offered a rare opportunity for outsiders to carve out a new home along the Mediterranean shore. Ancient scribes left behind clues that would puzzle generations. In the Hebrew Bible, 3 separate books, Amos, Jeremiah, and Deuteronomy, name Caphtor as the homeland of the Philistines. In Amos, chapter 9, verse 7, the text asks, "Did I not bring Israel up from Egypt, the Philistines from Caphtor?" This single verse stands out, placing the Philistines' origin overseas, not just anywhere, but in a land remembered as Caphtor. In Jeremiah, chapter 47, verse 4, the text calls them the remnant from the coastland of Caphtor. In Deuteronomy, chapter 2, verse 23, the text describes the Caphtorim as newcomers who displaced earlier coastal peoples. For centuries, the meaning of Caphtor was debated. Some pointed to Cyprus or Anatolia, but most scholars began to equate Caphtor with Crete. The argument gained strength from Egyptian records. The term Keftiu appears in New Kingdom tombs, describing a distant island people who brought gifts to the pharaohs. The consonants KFTR in Hebrew and KFTYW in Egyptian line up. Both Caphtor and Keftiu conjure images of the Aegean world. Archaeology added another layer. The earliest Philistine pottery, known as Mycenaean 2IC, appears suddenly in the ruins of Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gath. The shapes, the painted spirals, the motifs, these match ceramics from Crete and the Greek mainland, not local Canaanite wares. Mycenaean-style artifacts and fresco fragments show up in Philistine cities, strengthening the link between text and material evidence. Taken together, these clues transform the biblical claim into a testable hypothesis. If the Philistines truly came from Caphtor, if Caphtor is Crete, then their remains should carry a genetic signature from the Aegean. The stage was set for science to weigh in on a question that had lingered for over 2 millennia. In 2016, archaeologists working with the Leon Levy expedition at Ashkelon made an unprecedented find: a Philistine cemetery just beyond the city's ancient ramparts. Daniel Master, co-director of the project, led a team that uncovered more than 150 burials, most of them infants and young children. The graves were cut into compacted loess, some lined with a thin layer of plaster, and often accompanied by small vessels or bronze daggers. The overwhelming presence of infant remains was not just a cultural curiosity, it offered a rare scientific opportunity. For ancient DNA analysis, the team turned to the petrous portion of the temporal bone. This dense part of the inner ear is uniquely suited to preserving genetic material, especially in newborns. Underfloor infant burials sealed beneath mud brick protected the bones from centuries of environmental damage and modern contamination. Each sample was carefully documented, bagged, and handled in a field-clean tent with strict protocols, HEPA filters, full-body suits, and UV-sterilized tools. Export permits were secured from the Israeli Antiquities Authority, and a chain of custody log tracked every movement of the samples from Ashkelon to the Max Planck Institute in Germany. The rigor of these methods gave researchers confidence that the DNA results would be both authentic and representative. By focusing on infant petrous bones, the Ashkelon team produced a dataset with some of the highest quality ancient DNA ever recovered from the Levant. This foundation set the stage for a genetic analysis that could finally test the centuries-old debate about Philistine origins. Genome-wide analysis from the Ashkelon cemetery delivered the breakthrough that had eluded scholars for generations. Researchers at the Max Planck Institute, led by Michael Feldman, extracted DNA from 21 individuals spanning the early Iron Age. The team applied sophisticated modeling tools, QPADM and principal component analysis, to test dozens of ancestry scenarios against a reference panel of ancient populations from the Levant, Anatolia, and the Aegean. The results were unambiguous. Early Philistine infants buried at Ashkelon carried a striking genetic signature. Approximately 43% of their ancestry traced directly to Bronze Age Crete. The remaining 57% matched the local Levantine gene pool. This figure stood out not only for its magnitude but for its statistical strength. Of the 51 models tested, only those including a Cretan source population fit the data. Models based on mainland Greece, Sardinia, or Anatolia failed to account for the observed genome patterns. Michael Feldman summarized the breakthrough. She said they managed to catch this movement of people coming to Ashkelon from southern Europe. The DNA evidence provided the first direct biological confirmation of the biblical claim that the Philistines came from Caphtor, Crete. Daniel Master, co-director of the Ashkelon excavation, emphasized that the best genetic matches came from Crete, not from any other region tested. The genetic data, the biblical texts, and the archaeological record all converged on the same conclusion. For the first time, the debate over Philistine origins could be resolved with hard numbers and physical proof. The ancestors of Goliath's people had arrived from the Aegean, carrying with them a legacy that would shape the history of the Levant. Within just 2 centuries of their arrival, the distinct genetic signature that set the Philistines apart had almost entirely faded from the population. Genome-wide studies from Ashkelon reveal that by the Mid-Iron Age, less than 10% of Aegean ancestry remained. This rapid dilution came as the newcomers intermarried with local Canaanites, blending their bloodlines even as they maintained a separate identity. Archaeological layers from the 10th and 9th centuries BCE show a shift in material culture. Early Mycenaean-inspired pottery gives way to hybrid vessels, mixing imported motifs with local shapes and techniques. Philistine houses begin to adopt Canaanite courtyard plans, yet retain decorative touches that recall their Aegean past. Religious life, too, reflects this blending. Inscriptions from Ekron mention both Philistine and Canaanite gods, evidence of a society negotiating its place between worlds. Despite genetic assimilation, the Philistines continued to govern their Pentapolis, trade across the Mediterranean, and produce artifacts that set them apart from their neighbors. Their cities remained vibrant centers of commerce and culture for centuries, but the end came swiftly. In 604 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II of Babylon besieged Ashkelon. The destruction layer from this assault is unmistakable. Collapsed walls, charred debris, and a sudden halt to the distinctive pottery and architecture that had defined Philistine life. Babylonian chronicles record the conquest and deportation of the city's elite. After this event, the Philistines disappear from the historical and genetic record. Their culture, once so distinct, had already been absorbed into the fabric of the Levant. The final blow was political, not biological, a reminder that the legacy of Goliath's people was shaped by both the tides of migration and the forces of empire. Today, DNA confirms what centuries of debate could not. Philistine origins match Crete and the Aegean, echoing both biblical Caphtor and the chaos of the Bronze Age collapse. As Michael Feldman states, we managed to catch this movement of people. The past, it turns out, leaves a trace we can still read.